Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Traumaplicity podcast with your host, Dr. Amanda Helman. And the Traumaplicity podcast is two things. It's looking at any events or negative events or situations or traumas, and then knowing that our brain likes simplicity, simple steps to help you move forward. And so today we're on our series number 3 in Traumaplicity, and it's all about beliefs. And I'm very honored because I've been having guests come on to share about what they've overcome and how coaching has helped them. And I have a guest, MJ Clements, who's on here today, and I'll be sharing all about what she's going to be sharing. Actually, and we'll be listening to her about her story, some of her transformation, and also about a book that she wrote that you'll love to get for your kids and even read in with your family. And so MJ Clements, she's adventurous spirit has led her everywhere, from clown camp at Viterbo University to the Crosse, Wisconsin, and swinging from a trapeze to a lifelong gymnastics enthusiast instructor and homeschool mom. When MJ is not exploring the world around her, her world revolves around her family. That same passion to dream big extends to her precious grandchildren, who are the light of her life. My grandchildren are the light of my life. They are an integral part of my inspiration to write. I look forward to seeing them grow, to listen to their heart as their imagination ignites, and to hear about their own dreams. I'm excited to hear and to see how their imprint in this world will be, and to watch their adventures unfold. And so MJ is the author of Amazee's Dreams, and it's called Amazee. It says dream along with Amazee and dream she would. And so MJ will be talking about that later. So without further ado, MJ, it's so great to have you today, and thanks for being on the Traumaplicity show.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
I'm so glad. So today we get to ask you about your journey. So the first question is, where were you before working with me?
Okay, so I think I was sort of involved with the challenge that we had. It was a writer's workshop, a children's writer's workshop. But from what I can recall, it was in December 2022. I think I was just basically at the end of myself. And I found myself sitting in my living room, realizing that, even though life was good and everything seemed to be doing well, I think I was struggling inside. And I have struggled in the past with depression, and I recognized it. And it was at that point where it was like I just had this rebirth. I had a re-encounter with Jesus himself, and it was like he was just like you and he was sitting on the living room floor and asking me to just join him and just be with him. And I knew something had changed. It was not long after that I know that those closest to me noticed that there was this change that happened. So I knew something changed, but I knew that it's kind of like a layer effect, like I was beginning to see things that weren't quite healthy. They weren't quite right. And that led me into I look at it like I found Square Tree, and I wrote a story. And then after writing that story, within 6 hours, within one day, I knew that God did something. He wrote this story, and there's a longer testimony to that. But in that, I joined Square Tree. I started doing a cohort thing, but then I encountered you. And you started kind of taking that onion and started peeling down the layers and showing me those boulders that were in the way. And I started realizing that my brain really needed some rewiring. And that was when I started actually noticing that there was a different person inside that was wanting to come out, and it had a story. And that story came from, like, I consider my children's book sort of like a springboard to everything in my life after that. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank
I don't
you.
want to. I don't
Yeah.
want to say too much,
Yeah,
but
that's okay. It's good to hear your voice. So I loved how you shared your journey, where God, you had an encounter with God. You got to meet a lot of the amazing people at Square Tree Publishing, which is a publishing where you published your book that you'll talk about later. And through Square Tree, I joined forces with them. I have my own business called Healthy Roots LLC, but I am the Square Tree Publishing author breakthrough coach. And that's how I got to meet MJ and many other authors. And I know I've MJ, as we continue, I've had you through individual coaching for cognitive release coaching, and then also through group coaching that you talked about, where we really go into within you. What do you have within to heal so that you can move outside and launch? And so I loved your journey, and I love how you people noticed that you were transforming, and that you wrote that story. God gave you a download, and you had your children's book, which is incredible. And so that goes into our next question, which is talking about what were some very important sessions, maybe key sessions for you that impacted you and rewired your brain and thinking. And that really also goes into some of your techniques that you might still use, because that's the whole point, is we want you to keep using that. So, again, what impacted you and what do you use?
so I would say that um, I have to kind of jump right into the technique, because
Mhm.
it's the one of the things that you brought to us, was that I could break agreement with a lot of negativity in my head. And um, basically, prior to my re-encounter or my rebirth, was that even though I was living a lifestyle that was comfortable and everything, I think it was an act of the enemy, if you can say it that way, that I was being lulled to sleep. So in being lulled to sleep, the wires, they're not being activated. And what you did was you activated those wires. But in activating those wires, you realize that those wires are kind of mixed up. And I struggle. I struggled um, a lot with a major amount of insecurity. One of the things that I write, or I am writing in my memoir, is that I know I was brought up in a family where language etiquette somehow developed, because I think I have 4 sisters. I'm not going to talk about them or anything, but I know that we all have this proper way of conversation. Like we can sound professional, um, but even talking with people, I struggled inside with who I was, and feeling secure with what I'm saying or the information that I might have. And I always looked at it like I felt like I needed to have a degree, or I needed to have some sort of certification in order to be able to do or be anything more than just, not just, but, your everyday person. Um, but anyways, it was through that, um, getting through those blockages, that I started seeing a more healthier side of me. And those wires weren't so hot anymore. They were calming down, if you will. And in that, it calmed me down. And I was able to decipher even more about those negative uh, those negative conversations that I had in my head. And one of the techniques that I rely on, like I said, has to do with breaking agreement with those negativities. And what we do with those, we give them over to God. And I can share one. I don't know if this is the right moment, but I
Sure.
can share one of the times where I recall. So my backstory is that I did gymnastics all my life, and in my adult life, I taught the gymnastics, and it was a wonderful thing to teach little ones because I didn't have to deal with that adult language. I didn't have to deal with that adult conversation. I, was free to be a kid and be a kid with these kids, but teach them gymnastics. It was a love of mine. In fact, I had a supervisor, a friend of mine from the past. She was my supervisor, as I said, and she kind of made it ideal for me. And she would take care of all the stuff that has to do with the with the parents, and all I had to do was teach, and it was very ideal. And I took advantage of that in one way, that I didn't have to deal with that type of conversation, and it just basically made it a bad crutch, and it made it so that those wires just went, they just kind of rested. They were still all mixed up, but I didn't have to deal with that, because it's like when you start to come into that, those wires start getting hot and they start getting fiery, and then you're led by fear, and so yeah. And I think a lot of that, the picture of seeing the boulder is really fear. That for me, anyways, it was a fear that it seems like we can't push away, which we can in our logical sense, but God can. And when we're able to hand over those negative thoughts, when we recognize them, we can hand them over to Him. And this is really what got me. And when I share this often with other clients and stuff, is that we see that action. We hand over our negative to God, and thank you, God, and that's it. But when you did the next step, where you ask God, what do you have in return? I think that's kind of profound, because that's not something that we do. It's just not something that we, for me anyways, we're taught. You don't ask God, what do you have for me? Because He gave us everything, I mean, He is, everything for us. But to actually put that into action and ask Him, what do you have for me? And then just sit there and wait on what it is, and visualize what he's giving to me. This one particular session, I had to chuckle, because it's the one thing that I don't want. But usually it's when you give it up, when you surrender those things, that's when God can move through you, because you're out of the way, per se. That boulder is almost like you being in the way of what God can do in and through you. And so this particular activation or session, I saw me up on stage, and he was handing me a trophy, and it's like, I don't want a trophy. I had trophies when I was, doing gymnastics when I was younger. I got ribbons and I loved it and it was great. But now, I found, part of my passion is writing. So I'm happy to be behind the keyboard and typing up, stories and stuff like that. But He wants us to use our voice, and that is really what was being brought forth in this time and season of my life with Dr. Amanda. And yeah, so
Yeah. And well, thank you. And do you still use some of those techniques where you asked what you received
all
back,
the
or how
time,
do you use that? Oh,
all
good.
the time, all the time. The second, I truly feel that God wants us to live a life that is wrapped up in him. He's, the Bible says that God is love, and we are that living love, and we can't love if those wires are all mixed up. And we actually can't love in ourselves. We cannot produce love. It's only through, we're like a wellspring, reservoir, if you will, that when those things like what have been worked through in these sessions, when those things are brought up and recognized, and you break agreement with them and you hand them over to God, then that important step of letting God give you is the step that fills you with all of him, with his ways, his precepts, his, all of him, so that when the time comes, even though it seems like it's really hard for me right now, but when the time comes, the voice is going to develop so that he can share himself to other people through us. So yeah.
That's good. Well, thank you for sharing. I love it. And but you brought up two good points. So first one, when you're talking about, like, what did you learn? What were important? And one was learning how to receive. And a lot of times we learn not to receive, right? Not because, again, I want to honor parents and grandparents, but a lot of times in generations past or in families, we didn't really learn how to receive because there was a lot of disappointments, right? And so this is for all of us. We can all relate. We're humans. And so a lot of times we didn't think we were good enough, right? Or that we couldn't receive from the Lord. So even asking that, and he likes to do that to remind us to be like kids, right? The kingdom is all about receiving because he already did everything. So we're receiving back and back and back. And that's weird for a lot of us because we're not used to that, right? Because when we're with humans, it's a lot of conditions, a lot of what am I going to get back if I give you this, right? There's not that, hey, God's just wanting to give us, right? Obviously, he wants our time and he wants relationship, but he's so joyful as a father to do that. So I love how you shared how that was a big thing for you and that you still use that in practice. And also the voice, right? Because a lot of that, and what's really important is with the receiving, there's a lot of different steps and techniques depending on each person. Because like for you, MJ, that might have been okay, right? When we asked that. But for some people, it's hard to give away what was your previous identity, right? Like a lot of our traumas or our beliefs, if I'm, a lot of times when we're like, hey, what do you want to receive? Or like a lot of times people don't want to give things away because it's too scary to give away what right? If you're like, oh, I have anxiety, it's hard for me to give that away. What am I going to get back? And so sometimes in that, it's like asking the Lord, what does he want to give you so you can trust him, right? It's all about building trust and relationship. So I'm glad, MJ, you brought that up. And it does. It talks about more childlike things and techniques. So I just wanted to share with the audience, because sometimes some of you might be like, well, I don't know about that, right? But a lot of times the purpose of receiving is to help us come back to that childlike state and also know that you deserve it. And those are a lot of beliefs to unpack. And so when I do that, it's not always straightforward, right? Sometimes there is like I don't know if I deserve this. And so I'm not sure if that happened with you, MJ, but that is part of it, is a receiving.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
And it's good. So I think just as we're continuing, what would you share with women and men who are listening to the podcast about coaching and how it'll help them? And I always say, MJ, this is my big thing, is I love to help men and women and children and teens. It's been an honor. But I also believe in a good fit, that I have people I want to work with, right, that are a good fit for me and that they know I'm a good fit for them. There's a lot of coaches out there. And again, when you share it, you might share about me and what I do, but also about why coaching is a cutting edge thing for somebody to help them move forward. What is it? What has it done for you? And if you didn't do that, where do you think you'd be now? Just kind of having you think of that frame as well.
So I feel like I'm kind of heading for a blank, but I am. So I see, I see children in front of me. So I feel as though the people that I'm talking to are people that will be dealing or talking or interacting with children. And, you know, you had mentioned earlier about the, you know, the childlike faith, and a lot of things that you were saying are pretty much, you know, the story of my life, you know, and, um, 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 gosh, see, now I'm blanking out.
Got it. You got it. You're talking about children in the audience, children in audience and how this will help them. You got
Yeah.
it.
So, um, I think I guess I have to go back to this. So when I was younger, I was taught, and you know, I want to lift my parents up. They did the best they could with what they had, and I honor them, and I'm so thankful for them. But we learn along the way, and one of the things that basically got wired into my head was that I was to be seen and not heard. So we would go to a church choir practice or whatever, and my mother would say, you know, you need to be quiet, you need to be good, because you know God is all, you know, this is God's house, and you know, you need to behave and you need to be seen and not heard. And so though that little phrase somehow caught into that brain, and I was unable to hear my voice. So um, going back to what we were just talking about with the sessions, that was another thing that I think was important for me. You had mentioned that many might have a struggle just giving up their things. Well, um, I think maybe for me, um, I don't know if it's because of gymnastics or whatever, but it was quick for me to be able to just like, yeah, I'm just gonna give you everything because I don't, you know, none of it's,
Yeah.
you know, whatever, you know. Um, but to be able to hear him say to me that I'm giving you this, you know, you're cherished, you're loved because I first loved you, I created you, you know, to be able to hear those things. Um, I think it's valuable, you know, and I think that as we have a generation, a younger generation coming up, that they need to know that their value, you know, they need to know their value. They need to know that they're valuable in God's eyes, and that even though their little sentences might seem to be nothing like what we have for conversation, um, it's it's very important for us to listen to them, to hear them. And so I just think that as we, as coaches or peers or whatever you want to call them, um, that we would take time to listen and let their voices develop. Um, let them be heard, even if it's very
Mm-hmm.
simple and very maybe unimportant to us. It's important to them. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think that affects us in so many ways, you know, that if we're not going to be heard, then we must not have much importance or value. And so yeah, I don't know if I truly answered that question. I was
Yeah.
blanking so much, but
Did.
I
No, you did. You did. And I think like what you shared too was, you know, you're looking at, you know, when you think about coaching or anything, like you're wanting people to get their language, to get their voice back. And, you know, even thinking for you, right? Like all these things have helped you get that confidence to help you become childlike, because children are confident for the most part, right? They will do things like, you know, jump off things where you're like, oh, right? Because they're like just confident, you know, they dream, they imagine. And I think that goes into really what we're going to talk about next, which is your book, right? And so you were able to get onto a podcast, use your voice, you know, start moving out. And I've seen that growth in you, you know, just to be able to do that. So if you've been trying things for years on your own, you know, really coaching helps launch you. It's kind of like a little slingshot and propels you forward. And that's the whole point, is helping you learn, what do you have within you? What are the blind spots? What are the belief patterns? But actually to get rid of those. Like, I don't want, that's the thing, is that when you're doing coaching, well, for me personally, it's to release and shift your entire brain systems and then walk out those beliefs and walk out the new truth, which is a whole new transformation. And so that's what it is. So MJ shared about, like, even for kids and working with people, that, that's the whole point, is that you can start doing things that you always dreamed of doing because your belief system is rooted in who you are and you're deeper in your identity, and it moves you forward. So thank you for sharing, MJ. But I do want you to highlight, and I know you have that up, some of your little illustrations, but please share with us your book. Just tell us a little bit about your book, and if you have it, you can share. I know you have the illustrations, but for the audience, so they can hear about it and perhaps ask you questions after.
Okay, so if I can go real quick on the backstory of this. So many moons ago, I was invited to a women's retreat, and at the time I was teaching gymnastics. So my friend knew that I was, very much involved with the whole children's scene. So she just wanted something fun, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I felt like something was just birthed in me, and that I was going to do this little ditty. And that little ditty turned out to be this story. And I basically wrote it on the back of an address book and tucked it away in a nightstand and totally forgot about it until, what was it, last year? And when it came back to mind, I wrote it within six hours, and I knew that it was something that God birthed. I knew that God didn't want it on a shelf anymore. He wanted it on many shelves. And so I wrote the story. I submitted it to the publishing company that we're involved with, and it was just published in November. So this might be backwards, and I might.
I see it in Dream She Would. Yeah, yeah, there you go. Look at that. Love it. Yep. I think there we can see it. There we go. Yes, the Dream She Would. See that, audience? And make sure you check that out.
Yes, and I have a website, teamjcreatives.com is where most of the action's going to happen. In the book, she's basically determining her dreams, which I think we all have done and all kind of still do. But what she discovers is something a little bit more than just her trying to make her dreams come true. And in the story, or throughout the book, I have these little keys that are in different colors. And it is my hope and it is my desire that we can come together and learn about God's love and truly understand the love of God, that it's not just this little, I'm going to give you a hug and you're all better now. it's that love conquers. And I feel like that this past year, that's really what has happened since I've come into this community of writers and this publishing company, and with Dr. Amanda, that yeah, I just lost my thought. So anyways, yeah.
Okay. But Amazee is available also on Amazon, and you also have your website.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Amazing. And you can see the illustrations, right? And MJ has, no, I love that. And you have I love that you have little keys in the book. So that is part of, right? So you'd have to get it so that you and your grandchildren or children, right? Or children in schools, they can read it and find the keys, which is really fun. MJ. So hopefully, so MJ, if they have any questions, certainly I'll direct them to your website or to get the book on Amazon. So we have that information for you if you're watching on the Traumaplicity podcast on YouTube, if you're listening, tuning in to the Traumaplicity podcast on Spotify and all the works, or whatever station, or on my page. And please make sure you put some questions down if you have any for MJ. So MJ, it's been a pleasure having you today. And I know you have one other special thing you wanted to say for our audience. I think it was a prayer for people listening to the podcast. So how about we close out in that, since you have that, if you want to share it, if you have it up, and then this will be something for all of you to listen to and receive, or whether you're believing or you're on a journey, wherever you are, hopefully this is something that will encourage you.
Yeah. So what I've encountered is that it's the love of God for us, and that the Bible has so many not only stories but things that we can grow by. And this is the scripture in Ephesians 3:17 through maybe 19. But this is my prayer for you. And I just pray, Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, that he would live in your hearts because of your faith. I pray that your life will be strong in love and built on love. I pray that you and all God's holy people will have the power to understand the greatness of Jesus's love, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep that love is. Jesus's love is greater than anyone can ever know, but I pray that you will be able to know that love. Then you can be filled with everything God has for you. And know that God is love. God is amazingly great. And he has done for you that which is far above what we think or even imagine, because he loves you.
Thank you so much, MJ. So on that note, that was beautiful prayer. Thank you, MJ. So that is our episode, Traumaplicity episode, for all about beliefs, and really focusing on MJ, who had the honor and privilege to coach and see grow, and excited to see her, you continue to shine. Those of you listening in, remember, similar to what she was just sharing, you're always loved, valued, cherished, and you're worthy at all times, no matter what. And so I hope that you know that. And so tune in every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern time, on my Amanda Helman author and speaker page, or on our Traumaplicity podcast on YouTube with the shorts and different episodes. And then also on audio, Traumaplicity podcast. Check it out on Spotify, Google, Amazon, all the likes. All right. With that said, have a great week. Thank you, MJ, for being here. Take care, everybody.